What's up, guys? I'm just going to share with you guys a quick video. I'm going to go through as quickly as possible. It's kind of a lot of information to cover because we're going to talk about two different lifts, which of course the subject today is banging the wrist when you kettlebell train. So just going to give you guys, we're going to cover the clean and the snatch. So like I said, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly so we can get through the video in a relatively short period of time. So we'll start off with the clean. And for this clean, I'm going to step pretty close to the camera so you guys can see what I'm talking about, okay? So I got a kettlebell here. I'm going to step up. And so this is why it's banging your wrist in a clean in general, okay? It's because the bell is coming up and over and then falling down. So the mass of the bell gets higher than your fist and then it flops over and down, right? So when you clean, the bell never gets higher than this point right here. So remember, the term clean comes from you're trying to lift the bell from the ground or from the backswing to the rack in as clean of a movement as possible. So of course, if it's coming up and over, it's a lot of excessive energy that you're using, and of course you're banging your wrist. So you've got to, what helps is a little bit of a rotation. So thumb back in the backswing, and then thumb back again here. But it's rotating as it does it, okay? So there's a little twist, and you're just putting that bell just in a straight line from here to here. Going from, remember guys, a hook grip to where I'm at now, which is a spear hand. Little hook to spear, okay? So that's what it should look like, is like that and not like that, okay? So if you're still sort of struggling to grasp it, a little training technique that might help is if we assume that the issue is a result of, and it may not be, but if we assume that it's a result of you're using too much upper body, you're trying to muscle the bell up here instead of using your hips, then what you do is you get a second kettlebell. And this one here is actually twice as heavy as the one that I was just cleaning. So it's going to be a really perfect example of what I want to do, which is create contrast. So if I can do a deadlift with a lot of weight, what will happen is just going through this range of motion with a lot of weight, way more than I plan on doing the clean with, it's going to upregulate these posterior chain bending hip extension muscles. So then when I go into that light weight, I'm not going to be relying on my upper body. I'm going to just be relying on those muscles that are totally upregulated and recruited from a simple deadlift. So I've got more weight. I'm going to use the same movement, which is a hip hinge or a bend, and I'm just going to do a few deadlifts. Just about 3, 4, 5 deadlifts, depending upon how much weight I have, just to get those hip muscles, the hip extensors firing, and then set it down and go right into the clean. Now you can step away from that other bell, and now as you clean, you might notice, oh wait, my hips really just feel like they're just taking over, and I'm not relying on my upper body as much, okay? So that can kind of help to develop the technique, because again, it may look like that at first, right? You're gripping too tight, and you're trying to curl it like that, and then it's kind of banging over too. So over-reliance on the hips, or under-reliance on the hips, over-reliance on the upper body, can sometimes be that culprit for that. So moving on, so hopefully that helps. We're going to move on to the clean, or to the snatch, and before we finish this video, I'll give you one final piece of advice that will really help, okay? So for the snatch, I'm going to step away from the camera just a little bit, because obviously this exercise has more range of motion. So I'm going to be back here to all the way up here, so we should be able to see the whole thing. The snatch, same thing. You can always go back to the contrast technique that you learned with the kettlebell clean. It will work just as efficiently when you're trying to snatch without banging your wrist. So what I'm going to do, in fact, I'm going to step just a little closer, and I'm going to show you guys the way that if I was banging my wrist, or if I wanted to learn it without banging my wrist, one little technique that might help. And that is, you're not trying to get the bell all the way up at first. So starting from the ground, safety check, good posture. You should already have that type of thing down before you start snatching. And you can see what I'm doing right away. I'm not taking it full range of motion. In fact, you can go even really low and just float it to the top of a swing and punch through. And it touches the back of the wrist, but it doesn't lean on it. And then you just take that a little bit higher. Right? So you're just floating the bell, punching through. A little bit higher still. Getting used to it. And a little bit higher still. When you start going high enough, then it makes just sense just to come all the way overhead. So again, you can see I'm doing a weight right now that's so light that I can just play around with it on camera and show you guys. It's not intimidating to me at all. And obviously if you're learning how not to bang your wrist, you should be doing the same thing. But try that little short range of motion. By the time you snatch a kettlebell, you should have really good proficiency with a kettlebell swing. If you don't, and you're banging your wrist, well, it's because you haven't progressed properly. So there's your answer. But master the two-handed swing first, then the one-handed swing, and then progress to this, where you're just kind of punching through. Just like that. And right here, the amount of rotation of the bell, when you get a really light one, is very minimal, because it's from here just to about here, and then back again. Right? Well, of course, when you do a full range of motion snatch, the rotation will be further. The bell will end up about here. So it's going to rotate further. So you can start with this little progression. Like I said, even rotating the bell all that far as you punch under and pull it back, okay? To me, that seems like the most logical progression, especially if you're struggling with banging your wrist when you do snatches. Just don't go full range of motion at first. Learn how to float it, move the handle under, bring it back around, and move right into that backswing. With that said, one final little tip that I will leave you guys with. It may seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised most people don't think about this. If you're practicing these, give yourself time to screw up, and then it probably will happen. A little sweatband is a lifesaver, in your first week or two of kettlebell training, because obvious reasons. Just a small sweatband can go a long way to just preventing that pain and the bruising, and you'll be amazed what a difference that makes, especially while you're learning these basics. So, like I said, first of all, make sure you're progressing properly. If you're trying to snatch a kettlebell and you haven't got the one-handed swing, or you haven't gotten even the one-handed clean down, then we know why you're having problems. So make sure you're progressing in the right order. And then with that said, just kind of pay attention to those little cues I gave you today, and it should solve the problem. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time in the Kettlebell Gym.